Okay. Back to rest. I'm not sure if that's a good theme for anyone waking up before 8 o'clock in the morning, but anyway. So, who remembers what we talked about yesterday?
REST, obviously.
Yeah.
It's the standard way to change thing on the server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what is? Can you give a bit more content? What is REST about? What is it? If someone says describe REST to me, what would you say? I mean, you pointed at the right thing, but provide a bit more comprehensive picture. What is it about? What is REST? Yep.
Statefulness?
Statefulness is one of the properties, that's right, yep. So, well, depending on, you mean statelessness, right? Right, because the server doesn't need to worry about the connection state, but yes, that's one property. Sorry, yeah.
Standardization.
Yeah, standardization. What kind of standardization? Where is that happening and how? Yeah, but how? So if someone says, I want to learn REST, what would you say?
Rest in peace.
That's version number 1. Version number 2 is go to YouTube. And what's the third and probably correct, well, alternative answer?
RFC.
RFCs. What were those about?
It's an organization which is has to standardize multiple aspects of the internet, including also REST.
Yeah. So the RFCs, is that the organization, or what's the RFC itself?
RFC is request for comments,
right.
and then you have the IETF organization.
Correct. Yeah, so it's kind of their mechanisms of distributing this information, right? So it's the kind of documents. Hopefully, guys, it's the most formal documents you ever need to deal with. But there's worse stuff, like the ISO standards are even more annoying to read. But it's still important for you guys to be aware of them to some extent, anyway. Okay, cool. Coming back to REST, we heard some properties. We know where it's specified, but still, what's it about? You're my fallback. All right, let's start at the beginning of my slide set. No, we don't do that. So, anyone? What is it about? What does it describe? Is it a database structure? Is it a programming language? Yeah, you're on the right track, I think. I heard something that sounded about right.
Standard.
Standard is good, yeah. Of what?
Of the HTTP.
So, and what's that thing called?
Hypertext Markup Language Standards.
Hypertext Transfer Protocol.
Protocol. It's a protocol specification, right? So it doesn't think about data structures or how things are explicitly represented behind the scene, but it talks only about how to get information from point A to point B, right? And send some sort of information along that tells the server, hey, you need to do something on your side. Or the client says, hey, I want something from you, server, give it to me, right? So it's not, don't think about like an implementation of REST like a database that does everything for you on the back end. It's merely what goes over the wire, protocol, yeah? And in which order this needs to happen and so on. And then we talked about different components. What are the different aspects that we need to bear in mind as developers when we talk about REST and using it? I went through that very briefly at the end. What are the different things you need to know about of the protocol in order to use it? That stuff? Yay or nay? So we need this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, what is that doing?
It's the interface that allows you to interact with it.
That's
basically.
Exactly. So what specifically do those methods do?
They allow you to create, update, read, or delete data. And it's a standardized sort of way of doing that.
Yeah.
And then and REST specifically allows you to do it very easily through a program and not through the user interface.
Correct, right? So it's about machine readability. That's why it's the rigid protocol. And it contains methods that tell the server what to do, right? What else do we need in order to get, to facilitate the process? Two other components.
URIs to like send the commands properly.
Yeah, that's right. We need to know about UIs. Yeah, what else? Okay. What else do we need? How do we get feedback? How do we know things worked out?
Look at the status code.
Status codes, right? So we have a concept of status codes, which we briefly talked about. Do you recall some?
The 200 one that means that it was successful.
Yeah, that's correct.
400, that's it's something wrong with the client.
Yeah.
500 is something wrong with the server.
Exactly. So that's roughly what you need to remember. This is spot on, in fact. Yes. What else do we need? Is that all? How can we tell the server what to do? Like, not the method, not the task it's supposed to do, but in terms of what to operate on, rather. How do we do this?
That's through the URLs or URIs.
Yeah,
For
the
example,
UI.
students.
That's correct.
Something.
That's what to do what on, but how do you describe the representation in white distance?
JSON.
Some body,
some
right?
data.
Some data in the body. So we need this as well. So to summarize, we need UI to address the service. We need to know the structure of the service somehow, which we'll get into in a bit. We need to have an ability to tell the server what to do, create, read, update, delete. We need to be able to get feedback from the server whether things worked out or went horribly sideways. In the beginning, they always go horribly sideways, so it's important to be aware of status codes. And of course, we need to specify what to operate on largely, meaning what to actually change, do, or create, and so on. And that's the payload that needs to go along. So those 4 components are essential. And if you have those figured out for a given web service, then you're probably about there in terms of using it quite flexibly. So that's the key idea. Right. So we talked briefly about status codes. We figured this out. 100 and 300 is rarely used, so it's not particularly tragic. One of the things that we didn't talk about yet is, which of course relates to what we're actually sending over. Every time we're sending an HTTP request, right, in REST in particular, we need to tell the target side, the opposite side, hang on, what kind of data can you expect in the body? Right, the message has a header and a body. In the body, for example, in code JSON, we need to tell the counterparty, well, actually, hang on, it's JSON that you're about to receive and need to process, right, as opposed to XML or HTML or just plain text, which is also an option. And so for this purpose, there are a set of pre-specified header fields. I'm, of course, not going through those in detail, but there are sensible ones that are worthwhile remembering. For example, the content type. And this one basically just specifies, okay, here, that's how you deal with the actual, that's the kind of information you're supposed to accept, right? So how are media types or content in web standards specified? How is that usually specified? What would you see as a content type? You may know it from other areas, yeah?
You mean the general MIME types?
Yeah, exactly.
Applications
that's right. That's right. How do they work?
Well, if an application knows how to process a particular app content type, then it can choose to process it, and if any other content types, it can choose to ignore. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So it allows multiple benefits because you can basically tell the service, hey, you can expect, for example, what's the MIME type for JSON?
Application/JSON.
Yes, application/JSON, for example, right? So there's also text plain, image PNG, I believe, and so on. So the idea is that those MIME types are specified by having top-level media files that just roughly tell what. Please, there's a question.
Can you explain what JSON is?
JSON? Yeah. Yep. I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah. So that's right. JSON is a good point. So you guys didn't hear about JSON before, right? Good. That's fine. Cool. I actually have slides on it. But just assume abstractly you're sending anything, right? Media, video, JSON, okay, XML. No?
XML, yeah.
Another standard? Why?
No.
We make a session on this one. I convince you otherwise. So there's certain strengths to it. So application, video, and so on. So what they basically say is, here, that's the kind of type of content you have, and then there are certain subtypes you can send along. Here we see, for example, text plain. You know, we have plain text. Application JSON is, of course, the JSON form we talk about. Video, you specify an encoding on top of it. And those are well formed and well specified. And, surprise, surprise, where are they specified? In here. So don't learn it by heart, but just, again, it all points back to the same kind of boring standards we had to look at last session, right? So always in RFCs. So it's important to know where to look if you want to figure out, okay, I have a special media type, you know, what category does it fit into, right? There's the content. So that needs to be specified as well. That's very, very important. And the reason I'm saying is that you need to specify this in the header. I'll get to that in a second. Because if you forget to do so, some web servers will simply ignore your request because they don't know what they're getting, right? It's a bit like you receiving an email without knowing the person sending you something, which is, of course, a slightly different thing. But basically, you wouldn't just click on anything if you don't have a description of what this is possibly about. Please, double-click on the zip file, right? You better want to know what's inside before you actually do that, right? Same here. If the header, a content header, is not specified, an application should not just process anything it gets, right? So that's the kind of intuition there. Okay, let's put it into practice because I spent pretty much one session on just talking about the theory behind it, but I think it's quite important so you have a good understanding about the foundations and not just know how to use it. REST clients. So as Carl said, it's a format that is inherently machine processable, which is good, right? So it makes life a lot easier for us, but it also means they are standardized tools that can directly use and work with REST. So you don't need to write your own client. Well, eventually you probably need to if you want to use it in your program, but in principle for testing and debugging, there's an abundance of different REST clients out there. So keyword is REST client. One of them is Postman, that's probably the more well-known one, and then other ones such as Advanced REST Client and so on. Just to put some out there, you can of course use any of those tools you like. Just be mindful, some of them are, especially if they're a bit of ad hoc implementation, not complete, so they don't have the full feature set. So then sometimes it can be a bit challenging. Did anyone come across of any of those clients for whatever purposes? No, good. So Postman was earlier available. I hope that doesn't work anymore as a Chrome app. So you could load it as a Chrome extension, which is in principle a good idea, but for security reasons that has been abandoned. So if you find a pointer to the Chrome app of Postman, don't use that one, but rather download the native one. I think it's standalone. I'm not sure if you need to install it, but it's relatively straightforward. But just let's get into it to get a bit more feel of what you can do with this. So I'll show you the Postman REST client. That's how it looks like. So now we of course need to know some APIs. So how do we actually find out what we can do, and how do we interact and deal with APIs? For this purpose, I'm cheating a bit because, of course, I know some APIs already. So that's always the challenge. You, of course, need to figure out what you want to operate on, what you want to use. So how do those APIs basically look like? So here's one that's called REST countries, and it's really about country information in in some format in a RESTful way. So it's kind of very straightforward to actually use it, but it's good makes well for demos. The problem is there's no uniform way of specifying REST services, right? So they all have their own kind of different approach of specifying it. But you know already what you need to look for. You need to look for the endpoints. That is basically the URL or URI, if you want. You need to know what kind of body you need to send, right? The content type you want to send. Possibly status codes. They're sometimes not really specified, so you kind of need to try it out and see how it goes. What else did I forget? And the methods, right? So REST methods that we have. So in this case, it's actually reasonably okay in terms of specification. REST countries is just providing all information about all countries. Right? Such a beautiful idea, so let's just try that out. And here it's quite straightforward. They don't specify much, but you can expect that this is a rather static database. You probably wouldn't want to change the capital of a country. I don't know. I mean, who wouldn't want to, right? But let's say, assuming you shouldn't, then you probably don't need to do anything that has some impact on the server side. So in this case, the standard call would simply be a get, basically, to the, I'll just clean up a bit here, so hang on. A get to the service. So I just put the, if you can't read it, I put the UI on top and indicated the REST method as get. I think that's pretty much all you need to do, and you press buttons and it spits out that stuff here. Oh, that is something. So I'm not sure if that's actually legible. Hang on. Alright, I'll get out the magnifier. Alright, so what happened here? So on the left, so just to give an overview of the interface, so it's a bit more visible. On the top, here, that's where you specify the request, in this case the URL and the method and so on. On the left side, then down here, is our query parameters. That's basically what you send to the system, and could be a body included. So that's actually where the, for example, JSON content would go into. There are headers included. So headers is basically aspects that describe the content. There are some standard temporary headers that the Postman app automatically fills. Those includes, for example, the user agents. So user agent is by definition the browser you're using, right? So in this case, we're not using a browser, so it's not like Mozilla or Chrome, but in fact, Postman itself acts like a browser. There are tokens, there are indications about the encoding, the compression Postman accepts on return, and so on. A few other kind of temporary headers, not too relevant for our purpose, but what is relevant is that one here, and that is the content type header. So I added this manually beforehand. And you, go on, please cooperate. Yeah, I get there eventually. That's yeah. Anyway, so it says content type, and then here application JSON, because that's what I want to get back. Basically that format. And then I run this whole exercise. On the top right, send, and here on the right side, all that stuff is what you get in return. So first of all, one thing you want to look at is the status code. Okay, it's a 200. That means things went well, right? So no problems there, success. Timing, size, and all that kind of stuff. And some additional headers. We can also see what comes back in those headers. Ah, well, it actually is more specific now. It says, well, the content type I return to you is application JSON with the character set UTF-8. Down here, it gives you even more information. This is quite useful here. Access control allow methods. So basically it says, what are the kind of methods I actually support? What can you do? What REST methods can you use with me? And it says, well, the only one you can actually use is get. Right? Because we're not allowed to create resources, countries. We're not allowed to change countries, and we're not allowed to delete countries. All of which is reasonably sensible. So, so you get some information back here as well. All right, but most importantly, of course, is the payload, right? So this is all envelope, right? The metadata, the headers, and now we're looking at the payload, the content. And what do you see here? Well, we see Afghanistan, which is to little surprise because it's the first country in the alphabet. We find information like top-level domain, Alpha 1, Alpha 2 code, Alpha 3 code, calling codes, capital, alternative spellings, region, sub-region, population, longitude, latitude, demonym, area, and so on. Genie, what the heck is Genie? General knowledge, what's Genie? Yeah? That's right, I got inequality and that's spot on, right? So I'm not sure if it refers to income or wealth inequality, but it's usually something you know we can be pretty proud of because your Gini is very, very low, meaning your country is relatively equally distributed in terms of wealth and income. Anyway, that's more common knowledge kind of stuff. Anywho, so the point is, it spits something out with respect to all countries. I think that's pretty much all countries we get. What else do we have here? Yeah, the all on the islands. Ah, yeah, okay, that's a bit closer to home. Albania, and so on. But the idea is, fundamentally you get something returned, in this case a collection of countries, that all have a uniform structure. And that's the thing. There is no uniform specification of that structure, right? So it needs to be done by the actual service provider, or you need to figure that out yourself by actually debugging it and understanding it. In many cases it's self-explanatory, but sometimes, for example, we don't know what it actually means. The description against the genie was an example there. So usually those kind of things, of course, need to be specified as part of the service provider kind of thing. So, okay, but this gives you an exposure to JSON. That is JSON here, right? So JSON is basically a encoding format which follows for certain standards and is relatively simple in its representation. We go into that in a bit, but just to give you a feel, we wanted JSON, we got JSON. That's basically the idea. So, okay, instead of digging deeper into the respective country details, we can let's look back at the specification and see what they have to offer to us. So we have API endpoints, and one of the endpoints was all. Basically, give me everything you have in your database. And if you look at the URL, it's quite interesting from a understanding and design point of view. What does it say? Well, it's the root host, so restcountries.eu/rest, sensible path, v2, and then /all. What's weird about this URL, or if there's anything weird? What's kind of weird?
It has version 2 maybe?
Yeah. Why is that? Is that good, bad, or is it just weird?
Well, maybe we need to update the information.
Yeah. Yeah. What do we update sometimes specifically? Yeah.
What is that?
What do you mean with update? What specifically? I think you're spot on. Just
if okay, it doesn't have often, but if a new country appears, or if you have more coordinates for where the country is located, or etc., then you can update the information.
right. Okay. Yep. So that's one angle. Yep. Alternative use. But you're on the right track there. I use Carlos Forbeck. Yeah.
It allows you to also access V1 to see what's different.
Again, sorry.
It allows you to see the version 1 of the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Your backboard's compatible, so you can still look at old stuff. Yeah. What else?
And usually the data structure has changed.
Exactly. Right. So yeah. So the versioning in context of REST services usually refers to the structural changes, right? The API has changed, the endpoints have changed. They had a typo, for example, in list of countries and want to fix that, so you make a new API version. And the idea is, if you build against those, again, recall that it's mostly about machine processability and readability. If you build against those services and your app relies on this, you better want to ensure that those interfaces don't change, right? You know that from application development, if you're using interfaces and implementations, the interfaces should be relatively stable, right? Even though the implementation, that is number of countries or population size, latitude, longitude, Gini coefficient, all that kind of stuff can change, but not the structure, not the layout of how the data is represented and how the API looks like, hence the versioning. So it's best practice to actually have versioning encoded somehow, ideally in the URL. So it's very, very explicit that you know which version you access, and that it also binds you as a developer, meaning the developer of the REST service, to actually commit to not just changing anything randomly and then having people that can't use your service anymore, right? So, okay. So what else do we have? We don't only have, of course, the overview of all countries, but we can, for example, search countries by name. It's apparently a service they have. Search country by name. It can be native name or partial name and so on. So that's the kind of level of description. There's no formal way of doing this, but what you get again here is, well, something like this, right? So what's the difference here? If you compare it. So one of them was called v2 all as endpoint. This one here is v2 name and then name. So what that basically says is, okay, hang on, you're using kind of the same service, but actually you're attacking it from a different perspective. You're just not returning everything you have, but more specifically return something by name. It's pretty much like, ensuring that the client picks the right path for actual exploration of data. So in this case, we just copy and paste this thing. Go back to our tool of choice. Hang on, where is it?
One question.
Please.
The search, how does that?
Yeah. So yes.
Is it by the capitals which the country starts with, or can you search
Yeah.
the country name?
Absolutely. So, good question. Very good question. So, how does the search work?
Misspelling, how does it handle misspelling?
Exactly. All that stuff is not standardized.
No, that's
So basically, what happens here? Some services have search features. So when you have half the countries, right? Let's try that. Let's try Norway. So
when you write pain instead of Spain.
yeah, exactly. Well, that will probably not work. I suspect it starts with kind of algorithm they approach. See, that's already. So where do we end up? Cool. How did they get to that one? United States minor outlying islands. Interesting.
Yeah, that's the
Noor. Okay. So if we're more explicit and type Norway, then we actually get it right. So point is the REST service, how they implement it, right, in the back end, whether it's search, how the search is implemented, is completely up to the service itself. That's not part of the REST specification. REST just tells me, hey, you make a GET method call to that particular URL, and the service will provide something back in return. The service knows it's a GET request, and it can, apply search algorithms behind it. It can avoid search algorithm. It can return an error or whatsoever else. That's not part of the specification, so it's very specific to that service. But it happens so that I think the entire service is open source on GitHub, so you can actually look into it and figure out how they do the search in practice, right? So that's implementation. That's not interface anymore. And that's where it becomes a bit wonky sometimes. That you actually need to look at the specification and see how accurate or lack of accuracy it actually has. But now, for example, we navigated to Norway, right? So same structure as we had before for Afghanistan. We have the top level domain. You have the Alpha 2 and Alpha 3 codes, calling codes, different spellings, of course, where it lies in Europe and so on. So it's quite same uniform structure. So no. Didn't say it. But it gives you a rich set of information that may be of relevance. For example, you want to have an application that wants to figure out the bordering countries of Norway. Voila, here all the countries Norway has borders with, right? Finland, Sweden, Russia. So it's actually quite neat, those services. Oftentimes purely informational in a way. Cool. So the essence here is different REST APIs have different endpoints. So we use the endpoint name, for example. Previously, it used some search mechanism. If you, for example, want to ensure that you want to only search by full text, or search the full text, only by full country name, you can use parameters in this particular API using the question mark again. We talked about this when we talked about UIs, that you can pass parameters by having a question mark as part of the GET request and things like this. What else do they allow you to do? Well, you can actually search for countries by alpha code, by the ISO code. What is that thing, the ISO code? Yeah, it's a standard, of course, but what kind of, what do you associate it with, the 2-letter ISO code for country names? That's the organization that has standardized those. That's correct. But sometimes good for us to know what that means. 2-level ISO standard country code. What is Norway's country code?
NO.
Exactly, NO, right? So what's France country code?
FR.
Exactly, right? So that kind of thing. And they have been kind of pretty uniformly adopted for top-level domains as well in the DNS. But fundamentally, it's an ISO standard, and they exist in 2 versions: the 2-letter character, 2 character standard, and 3-character standard. So if you come across this, that's basically what it is about. There you go. Here's the specification. Alpha codes, the 2-letter and 3-letter country codes are supported. Colombia, Norway, EE is Estonia. Don't know. I think so. Okay. So, and basically this whole thing. So if I'm going back to the left here. Provides us with a kind of a rich set of different things. Yes, please.
What about the country code .co.uk?
That's a TLD. Yep. So this is a
common web.
yeah. So different countries have different regulations as to how they manage lower level domains. For example, in the top level domain of UK is UK, literally. But in UK, as far as I recall, it at least was not possible for private entities to register a domain ending just UK. They simply didn't open it up, the registrar in UK. So they decided, no, all I think commercial use needs to be indicated by having co-UK as an ending. Whereas other countries, such as Norway, are indifferent about it, right? They just say, well, first come, first served, whoever wants to have a .no address gets it. So the responsibility is delegated to the respective countries, right? They're only the top level domain, that is the NO, the UK, is actually mandated and governed by the ICANN specifically, and that links back to the ISO specification for country names, because it's, that's the easiest way, using the same standard. I think it's very sensible, right? So you don't have 5 different notations for Norway, right? So NO, NW, or NY, I don't know, could also be, right? So, but this is the reason. Slightly different story, probably to get there at some other session. Okay, but you're right, talking about countries, we kind of already in this discussion. But you see, okay, this API is built around, they have a massive data set somehow and want to make it accessible to different people from different perspectives, using different mechanisms. And the idea is that you can really relatively easily explore them yourself. So I will encourage you actively to actually try and use, for example, Postman to interrogate this kind of service and actually try out what you can actually find out with respect to content.
I don't get the same output as you
What? Yeah.
in the browser. Just
What is different in the browser? Is it the formatting or the actual content?
format.
Right. Yes, that's right. This is part of the deal. When you use those tools, they actually format it nicely. This is the output you have, right? Roughly.
Yeah.
Roughly. So it's just a minified version, basically just flat text, right? So it's not particularly legible. I mean, you can debug something, but the problem is you lose an overview of the structure, right? So here's quite neat that you, for example, see that the alternative spellings is some sort of second-order nested collection, right? So NO, Norge, Norway, Kingdom of Norway, and so on. And this is probably not really visible in the raw system. So browsers can be used for this, but they're not
Using
optimal.
Firefox?
Sorry? So some of them have plugins for this. I recommend you to use one of those tools, because it's very, very hard, especially it's very hard to specify any header information, the methods for invocation and so on. For testing REST services, just use one of those proper tools. Yep.
Can you just throw it into a JSON parser?
Again, sorry.
Can't you just throw the plain text into a JSON parser?
Yeah, that's precisely what the purpose is, yes. So the REST tools, what the purpose of those tools is to debug the web service, right? The thing is now we have two sides. We have the web service, right, the country web service, that we, for example, want to debug or understand. Before you build a parser, you probably want to understand the data, right? Since there's no uniform specification of the structure, you kind of need to do it by hand, right? You literally look at the data and say, hang on, okay, there's the name thing, then we have the top level name, then the next field is alpha code, and so that's the kind of problem with reconstructing it, right? So this is the development tool. This is not so much, or debugging tool, whatever you want to frame it, but of course you wouldn't want to use the web service genuinely. So imagine you giving a geography class. I don't think I would come up with the REST client and suggest, hey, let's explore Norway or Sweden, or for that matter, or whatever else, because you would of course have some sort of application sitting behind it and making sense of it, right? But it's just raw information that you can use for whatever. Right? If you want to draw a map with the countries surrounding it, or if you want to have a tabular overview or a graph representation, all up to you. You pass that stuff and use it, right? Or if you want to figure out what the calling code is or the currency of a given country, right? It's a good default go-to for country information, basically. With respect, of course, to your actual application. So that's basically just as an example.
But what do I need to set in Chrome in order to get it readable?
There may be a plugin for having this. Have a look. I mean, the problem is one of the plugins was literally Postman, or extensions rather, but they are prohibited it because of the potential for information leaks and attackability and so on. So the extension is no longer working. Hence, it is a standalone application. But you need to check. I would strongly recommend you not to use any extensions or plugins. Please.
You say that they were online
Forbidden?
was that word?
I may have used that word. Yes, it's deprecated. So I think it will be eventually completely remove the support. So the API, the extension for Chrome doesn't work anymore for Postman unless you use a really old version of Chrome, I believe, because I tried that myself. But if you go to the webpage, which is getpostman.com, I believe, yes, getpostman.com, you download the standalone app, and then you get this interface. And the only thing you need to do is literally say you want to create a request, and then indicate the URL you want to interrogate, indicate the headers and the method, and then you just send it off and see how it goes. That's the key idea. There's alternatives, of course. I mentioned the advanced REST client. I'll put the slide set up after this session, and then you can follow through with these URLs. So one of the things that that I want to highlight here, while there is a standard specification for the protocol, there's no standard specification of how the services look like on the server side, right? Here's a different one. This is JSON placeholder. It's a well-known REST test API for prototyping, so you can do kind of whatever you want with their resources just to play around with this. And it's free, it gives you a lot of demo, introduction, and so on. But fundamentally, they do it quite differently. For example, they have the resources here. They have posts, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, users, and so on. So, and here they describe what they actually support, what you can do. So this is their way of specifying it. Well, on the path posts, if you can read this, you're allowed to run a get request, so get all the posts, for example. You may also be able to post something to posts here, right? The problem is that what you're missing then is generally that you need some sort of example. So what they do here, they show it in the kind of JavaScript notation, but the idea is basically you need to figure out what is the actual content that I generally need to send to those services, right? So here we can, for example, see, okay, we're sending a put request to a given post. So post 1, the first post. Probably can open the posts for a second in Postman, so you can actually see what's going on. Let's run a get on this one without this thing. See what it spits out. Oh, it does. Right. So you see there's a lot of posts. They're all equally meaningless. I also always lose kind of randomly generated code, loro ipsum style output, and we have different entries here. So they are separated by commas, but in those curly braces. Again, I'm coming to the structure in a bit. And then we have user ID, ID title, and body, and that is uniform again. So now you learn already, hang on, the structure of the content looks like this, right? So if I want to send, for example, anything and modify the structure, well, I'm probably well advised just to copy that. Oh, that makes you weird. Oh, it's already something there. Okay, cool. Yeah, I use that. To actually, send something to the service. So, for example, if I want to send a post to this text service, I would say, well, I want to send a post information. My content type is JSON. My body is like this. It follows the structure there. The only thing that you will not need to fill is the ID. As we talked about yesterday, IDs for posts are assigned from the server itself. So that's not something the client should deal with unless you want to change a given entry. So if I were to say I want to change entry 1, in fact, the service is not optimal in that it actually doesn't really allow changes. It just responds as if it had changed something. So if I set a put request right now, so saying, okay, for post with the ID number 1, here is the post, or the ID number 1, please send this new information. Hang on, I need to append this as well. And we'll see what it does. Does it explode? All right, it returns 200. So what it says, well, I did what you wanted to. Now the entry looks like this. But if you if we retrieve all the posts again, we'll see that nothing has changed because, of course, we shouldn't be able to. We shouldn't be able to change the actual database there as well. So we need to do it by in kind of some sort of local demo in a second. So first of all, you earn a little bit of break. Then we talk about JSON, how the format looks like, and then I'll show you some demo in Go to tie things a bit up, and then see how we can change resources as well more richly. So let's take a break until 25, perhaps. That's a bit long, right? That's too long. Then do 23. Just for the sake of odd number.
Wow. 20 last.
I did the Heroku tutorial, and then that was